All right, so today we're introducing a new political movement after World War I known as fascism. And it's going to sound a lot like communism, but they are quite different. Well, they have one major difference, and I'll tell you about that momentarily. But it should sound like a type of government that you wouldn't want to live in. It's going to sound like a dictatorship, and it's not going to sound like a very American way of doing things. But it's got 6 kind of different characteristics, and we'll look at each one really quickly. So cultural characteristics. There is some very, very much government censorship. There is no freedom of the press or freedom of the speech. They're going to censor everything and make sure anything that is written or sang about or drawn about is going to make fascism and fascists look good. Indoctrination, that's when they try to brainwash people, and they're going to do this through schooling, public schooling, government schooling, and also through groups, sort of like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. For example, in Germany, they had what was called the Hitler Youth. And it was basically teaching young boys how to be good future Nazis. And then almost every fascist country has secret police. You don't know who they are, but they're out there watching to make sure everybody's behaving and nobody's being a threat to the government. As far as economic characteristics of fascism, the government pretty much controls the economy. They can tell factory owners what to make and how much to make. So there's not a whole lot of freedom. But if you are the factory owner, you do get to keep the wealth. So it's not like communism where there is no private ownership. You get to privately own stuff, but the government does kind of tell you what to do still. As far as political characteristics, they are extreme nationalists, okay? So imagine like the person who has more school spirit than you've ever seen before in your whole life. Like, it's kind of weird they have so much school spirit. Well, that's how fascists are with national pride or pride for your country. Like, it's more than just like, I love my country. It's hardcore, my country's the best, and if anybody gets in our way, we'll wipe them out type deal. So it's hardcore, extreme nationalism. Very often racist as well, especially in Germany. They believed they were the master race and everybody else was inferior. Almost always only one political party is allowed, and it would be their fascist political party. And it's almost always ruled by a dictator of some sort. As far as basic ideas, authoritarianism, which means the government has total power, all the power. The state or the government's more important than the individual. It doesn't matter, that you want privacy or that you want this or you want that. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what's best for the country. Coaches use an idea like this all the time. It doesn't matter what you want. You want to be the quarterback, or you want to bat number 3 or whatever. It doesn't matter what you want. It only matters what's best for the team. Well, that's what they believe in fascist countries. It doesn't matter what we want individually. It only matters what's best for the country. Usually have some sort of charismatic leader, somebody who can give up and give speeches like this fella here. He's trying to pump up a crowd. That's Mussolini, who we'll learn about in a minute. And usually action oriented. They don't just talk a big game. They actually do what they say they're going to do. Some chief examples: Italy is going to be the first fascist country. Germany is probably the most infamous fascist country. Spain actually becomes fascist. They never become like a major fascist player in World War II, but they do become fascist. Socially supported by middle class, industrialists, and the military. So what's that saying is, with communism, it's poor people who like communism because they're going to get stuff. That's not true with fascism. Fascism is usually supported by the upper class people because they're going to be able to stay rich. So middle and upper class, wealthy, industrial, factory owner types, and military types because they're going to benefit from this sort of group. So that is fascism in a nutshell. All right. I might as well go ahead and mention one way it's different. The main way it's different from communism, all that stuff on that chart is pretty similar to communism, except one big part, and it deals with the economic and social parts of it. See, communism, they believe that there should be no classes, like social classes. They think everybody should be equal. They think that wealth should be spread around and controlled by the government. Fascists don't believe that. Fascists believe that there will be rich and there will be poor, and everybody has their place, and the rich probably need the poor to stay rich and get richer. So communists try to spread out the wealth and have no social classes, but fascists believe that there should be and there will be social classes. There will be rich and there will be poor. So that's the main difference there. Also, communists hope to spread their ideas across the world. So they're more of a globalist mindset. They want communism to spread around the globe, and they want that to be the way of the world. Fascists don't really care about the world so much. They really only care about their nationality and their nation and their country. So another difference, communists are more focused on the world, and fascists typically are only more focused on their own country. Okay, so sorry about my dog there. Today we're going to introduce fascism. We've already talked a little bit about it, looked at the chart, looked at the different characteristics of fascism. Now we need to talk about the world's first two fascists. And usually when you say fascism, people think Hitler. But really a guy named Mussolini was the very first fascist. And he was a newspaper editor from Italy. And he's going to rise up to power in Italy and take over Italy and form a fascist dictatorship there. But like I said, he was a newspaper editor, and he's not real happy. A lot of Italians were not real happy for a number of reasons. Italy is not doing well at all after World War I. And part of it's because they were mad. You know, they were promised land after World War I, and the Treaty of Versailles did not give them the land they thought they deserved. So they felt betrayed, and they felt pretty bitter towards the Britons and the Frances of the world. You also had some economic problems there in Italy. Inflation, like their money, was starting to get worth less and less. Unemployment was going way up. So they had some economic problems that people were complaining about. And it just didn't seem like the government was doing much about these problems. So here comes this guy named Mussolini, and I showed you a picture before this section of the video. And like I said, newspaper editor, politician, and he's going around saying he can do better. Okay, so he's criticizing the current king and the current government, and he's promising that he can, for lack of a better phrase, he can make Italy great again. And a lot of people are starting to listen to the sort of things he's promising. He's promising to fix Italy's economy. He's promising to rebuild Italy's army and navy. He promises that he can be a stronger leader than the king. So he's coming around basically making some bold promises. And, he knew how to publicly speak and give a good speech. And he knew how to manipulate people and, using their emotions. And he gets quite a following. And when he feels like he has a large enough following, he and his followers are going to, what the book calls, march on Rome. This huge group of fascists and Mussolini, they march into Rome, and they're not using force, maybe a little, but it's not a coup. It's not an overthrow, but it certainly could be if they don't get what they want. So a bunch of fascists march into Rome, kind of threatening the city, threatening the government, threatening to use a lot of force and overthrow the government. And the king felt pressure, and he gave Mussolini some power. And once Mussolini had a little bit of power, he's going to take more and more and more until he has absolute and complete power. Now, what if the king had resisted and had not given him power legally? Mussolini probably would have used force. It probably would have been a coup like Napoleon did in France or Lenin did in Russia. But it never did come to that because the king gave in and gave him power, gave him a title. He became known as El Duce, or the leader. And like I said, once he had a little power, he took more and more and more. And before long, he was basically a dictator. Now, some of the things that he is going to do as the leader, okay? He abolishes democracy. No more elections. No more voting. No more political parties except his party, which again was the fascist party. He had a secret police force, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, and you didn't know who they were. So if they heard you talking trash about the fascists or Mussolini, you got disappeared, basically. And usually they would knock on your door around 2 a.m, and you were never seen again. Government censored everything. Radio stations, all you heard was Mussolini's awesome, Mussolini's awesome, fascism's the best, fascism's the best, Mussolini sucks. If that's all you, I'm sorry, Mussolini's great, not sucks. If that's all you ever heard, maybe eventually you'd start to believe it, okay? Radios could only publish and broadcast fascism ideas. And they could only say things like Mussolini is the best, okay? Mussolini outlawed strikes. Workers were not allowed to go on strike anymore. So these are just some of the things that Mussolini does to not only gain power in Italy, but some of the things he does once he is in power in Italy. So just to review, he builds up a following by making bold promises. Once his following has reached a large number, they march to Rome and threaten to overthrow the government forcefully, but they didn't have to because the king gives in and gives Mussolini power legally. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that picture there of Hitler in shorts. It's not every day you get to see a picture of Hitler in shorts. I like how he made that outfit look good, especially his knee-high socks there. That was not a good look at all. But anyway, you've been learning about Adolf Hitler for a long time now. You know he's a bad guy, but I will just kind of review a little bit about him. He was a soldier in World War I. First of all, before World War I, he was kind of a loser. He was a high school dropout. Wasn't good at really anything. Thought he was good at art. Apparently wasn't that good at art after all. But he just didn't really know what he wanted to do with his life. And like I said, high school dropout, and just wasn't very successful at much. Then when World War I breaks out, he realized he found something he was good at. He was good at being a soldier, and he was a very brave and devoted soldier during World War I for the bad team, for the German army. So his side ended up losing, but he was a good soldier, won many medals. The Iron Cross was a famous German medal. He won, I believe, 2 of those for bravery during World War I. Now, after World War I, he was pretty ticked off about the Treaty of Versailles and how everything got blamed on Germany. So he promised that he was going to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and get some revenge for that, what he called a terribly unfair treaty. But anyway, at the end of the war, he joins this tiny right-wing, kind of crazy, well, not kind of crazy, they were crazy, group called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And everybody kind of thought they were crazy, so nobody paid much attention to them, and they were pretty radical, but whatever. They're not important, don't worry about them, right? Well, perhaps people should have worried about them because they go from a tiny, kind of crazy right-wing group to taking over Germany eventually. But yeah, it was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi for short, and he's going to join that group right after World War I. They were fascist, okay? So that's why we're talking about them today on this video. They were fascist. They had their own symbol. It was the swastika. You've all seen, I'm sure, what a swastika looks like. They had their own little private army. I neglected to tell you, Mussolini in Italy, he had his own little private army. They all wore black shirts, so they were called the Black Shirts. In Germany, they all wore brown shirts, so they were called the brown shirts. Sometimes they were called Nazi stormtroopers. But like I said, at first, very tiny, right-wing, kind of radical group. But they are going to gain more and more and more and more influence over time. Hitler starts off just a member of this group, and because he was such a good and organized person, not a good person, an organized person. He was good at being organized and a good public speaker. He went from being just a member of the group to eventually becoming the leader of the group. And the German version of the leader is Der Führer. And if you've ever seen a World War II movie, you've probably heard him called Der Führer. So his big idol is Mussolini. So he's a fascist. Mussolini's a fascist. Mussolini rose to power and conquered his country. Hitler wants to do it the same way. If you remember, Mussolini got a bunch of people and went to try to overthrow or march on the city of Rome, and the government just kind of gave in and gave him power. Hitler is going to try to do the same thing with the Nazis. They're going to try to march on Munich and see if they could just take power peacefully by threatening force like Mussolini did. It didn't work out for Hitler the same way. They get busted. It didn't work out. He gets actually arrested. And, it's treasonous, right? Trying to overthrow your government like that. So he could have technically gotten death. But he only ended up getting sentenced to 5 years in prison. So it was kind of a light sentence. And he only had to serve 9 months. So he really didn't get much of a punishment. But a key point here, Mussolini was able to just march onto Rome, and they kind of just gave him keys to the country. Hitler tries to do the same thing, and he's arrested. So it doesn't work for Hitler. But what is important is he is going to write a book while in prison called Mein Kampf. And he tells everybody what his plans are. And I guess nobody took him seriously or nobody read the book. But he lays it all out in this book. Some things he said in his book, Mein Kampf. A lot of it was the whole racist stuff, that Germans are the master race, blonde-haired, blue-eyed master race, and they're the best at everything, according to Hitler, in this book. So what he wants to do is get rid of all the non-blonde, blue-eyed folks, because they are, let me do my air quotes, they're polluting the gene pool, and so he tries to exterminate them, get them out of there, kill them, make them move, just get them out of there. And, in his mind, his country will be full of these perfect humans, the best writers, the best mathematicians, the best scientists, the best athletes. And that's what he's trying to create in Germany. So therefore, all other races that weren't this German, what he called Aryan race, were, in his opinion, inferior races. So this was, a lot of his beliefs were very, very obviously racist. He also said the Treaty of Versailles was a bunch of crap, and that he was going to ignore it, overthrow it, not obey it. He said that the lands taken from Germany, he was going to get back. He was going to go back and forcefully take those back. He said Germany needed more land. Not just the land that was taken, like more land. He called it Lebensraum, which means living space. So how are you going to get more land? You have to conquer others. So he went ahead and said, I'm going to go conquer people and take their land. So he said all these things that he was going to do, and he ended up doing them all. So perhaps we should have read it or taken him more seriously, but he ended up doing everything he said he was going to do. After getting out of prison, the Nazis weren't as popular. Like while he went into prison, Nazi popularity went down, and so he's not as influential at first. But once the Great Depression hits, Germany gets really desperate, and they're willing to listen to whoever will promise them to make their lives better, and that's where Hitler and the Nazis come in. So the thing with the Nazis, whenever life in Germany was bad and people were desperate, Nazi popularity went up. Okay, life in Germany goes down, people get desperate, and they listen to the Nazis. Life gets better in Germany, Nazi popularity goes down. Nobody needs them and their crazy promises. So right at the end of World War I, life sucked in Germany, Nazi popularity goes up. Okay, You remember when we started giving them loans? It was called the Dawes Act. Well, guess what happened? Life got better. Germany popularity went down. What happens in 1929? Great Depression. Life sucks again. Nazi popularity goes up. So when life gets bad in Germany, people start listening to Nazis. Life gets good in Germany, nobody listens to the Nazis. So just turns out that the Great Depression made life pretty bad in Germany, and that is going to help Hitler and the Nazis rise to power. Okay, so by 1932, I believe, the Nazis were one of the bigger political parties in Germany. Like the Great Depression set in, life had gotten really bad in Germany. People were desperate, and people were willing to listen to Nazi and Hitler promises. So their popularity went way up, and they became one of the main political parties in all of Germany. And the government felt that, kind of started feeling pressure that maybe they should, give in a little bit and give this Hitler guy a role in the government. So he never ends up having to overthrow the government. They decided, the German leadership decided to give him a little power. They gave him this title. It was called Chancellor. I guess it's kind of like a vice president, secretary of state type job. It's a pretty powerful position, but it's certainly not the leader of Germany. And once they announced that he's the chancellor, like Mussolini did, he's going to take more power and more power and more power until he has it all. One of the first things he does is calls for these elections. And guess what party first of all, it wasn't time for a new election. Hey, let's have a new election, because he wants his party to start winning more and more seats in the German parliament. So even though it's not time for a new election, he orders a new election. So they have this new election. And right before election, the Reichstag building, the building where their parliament voted, caught on fire. And the Nazis start spreading rumors that it's all these other political parties that had done it, when it was probably them that started it. So after all these rumors had spread, making all the other political parties look bad, after this election, guess who won a bunch of seats? The Nazis do. So it's a pretty shady election and pretty shady results, if you ask me. But now you have a Nazi chancellor, and now you have a Nazi parliament. And now guess what the Nazis can pretty much do? Whatever they want. So sort of similar to when Mussolini takes over, Hitler's going to do a lot of the same things. He bans all other political parties. He has all of his political opponents arrested or worse, even killed. He creates this basically like his own little private Hitler army called the SS. And you've maybe heard of them. They were some pretty scary dudes. Anytime there's a World War II movie, it makes the SS guys look really evil. Let's see. He's going to arrest and even have hundreds, maybe even thousands of his enemies taken care of, arrested, killed. Let's see. He had his own secret police force called the Gestapo. You've probably heard of that one. He takes over the economy, starts telling factories what to make and how much to make. Here's something you've probably never heard. Hitler did a good thing. That's even weird to say. He's going to put millions of Germans back to work. Can't argue that, can you? But what sort of work was it? A lot of them were building factories, working in factories, building highways like the Autobahn, making weapons, serving in the military. So these sound like good things. And giving people jobs is a good thing, but he's breaking the Treaty of Versailles. We haven't really gone over that much in these videos, but in the Treaty of Versailles, it said his army could only get so large. It said his factories couldn't make certain weapons or could only have certain weapons. Well, he's having his factories build all these weapons he's not supposed to have. He's hiring all these men to be soldiers he's not supposed to have. So he's really breaking the Treaty of Versailles by doing a lot of these things. And who should step in and enforce the Treaty of Versailles? Remember that group, the League of Nations? Do you think they step in? No, they don't. Okay? Remember, Britain and France are the leaders of that league, and they're afraid of standing up to a bully, because sometimes when you have to stand up to a bully, a fight happens. And they've just gotten out of one of the worst fights in history, World War I, and they're afraid to stand up to Hitler because they're afraid it could lead to another fight. So they just kind of let him get away with it, okay? Hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Don't do it again. But he really doesn't get in trouble, and he just gets away with it, okay? And every time he gets away with something, it makes him braver and bolder and bolder. All right? Some other things he does. He wants to take over not just public life, but private life as well, okay? Takes over the press, takes over the radio, takes over literature, painting, film, turns all that into propaganda. Hitler's the best. Hitler's the best. Nazis are the best. And if that's all you ever heard every single day, you might eventually start believing it. All right. Had these huge book burnings. If any book was considered dangerous to Nazi power, you had these huge book burnings. School children, like I mentioned, had to either join the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. Boy Scouts was called the Hitler Youth. Girl Scouts was the League of German Girls, and they were brainwashed into being good Nazi children. And then he also started implementing his racist ideas, especially against the Jews. So very similar in the things that he does. He's kind of copying Mussolini in many ways. Okay, so the last part of the section talks about Hitler's racist ideas towards the Jewish population in Germany. So he believes he has a Jewish problem, and when you have problems, you come up with solutions. So his first solution to his Jewish problem was to make them leave on their own. And he's going to try to make their life a living hell in Germany so that they'll just leave on their own. And he does this a couple ways. He takes all their citizenship rights away in a series of laws called the Nuremberg Laws. And we don't really go into much detail on it, but they couldn't hold certain jobs, they couldn't be citizens, they couldn't write books, they had to wear a Star of David. And he just starts really, with these laws, making their lives pretty rough. And again, he's trying to get them to just leave on their own. Then the textbook talks about this night where Nazis and other just German citizens started attacking Jewish people, started destroying Jewish homes, started destroying Jewish buildings. And the cops didn't do anything about it. And it was called Kristallnacht. Crystal Nacht means night, Crystal Night, and it got that nickname because of all the broken glass that was on the streets. It looked like crystal, so that's why it was called Crystal Night or Kristallnacht, and it's sometimes called the Night of Broken Glass. But if you got all these people destroying your stuff, destroying your home, destroying your business, beating you up, assaulting you, and the cops aren't doing anything about it, maybe that's a sign that you probably need to go somewhere else. So the Nuremberg Laws and then Kristallnacht were the first part of his Jewish problem, his solution to his Jewish problem. As you're going to see, it wasn't working fast enough. So then he goes on to his second solution, which was to make them live in these nasty, overcrowded ghettos. And he hopes disease will spread, and a lot of them would die that way. And then that wasn't happening quickly enough, so then he goes to what he calls his final solution. And maybe you've heard it called the final solution before, and that was just those terrible, terrible concentration camps. So anyway, all this hatred or hostility towards the Jews in this country was called anti-Semitism. You've probably heard of that word before. Hitler was a huge anti-Semite and is going to use the Jews as scapegoats and blame all these things on the Jews when, really it wasn't the Jewish people's fault, but they're going to get blamed. And again, the propaganda, it's the Jewish people's fault, it's the Jewish people, it's the Jews' fault, it's the Jews' fault. If that's all you ever heard day after day, week after week, maybe you'd start believing it. So he used propaganda to blame the Jews and just made them the scapegoat of all of Germany's problems. And it seemed to have an effect on the people of Germany, okay? So that is how Mussolini and Hitler rose to power in their countries. Pretty scary stuff that the people would just allow those two guys to rise to power. In the days ahead, we'll talk about the things they started doing and how they both started kind of breaking the Treaty of Versailles, how they both started doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, how the League of Nations should have stepped in and made them stop, but didn't. And these two men are going to lead us into World War II. So, hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. Don't forget to take today's quiz. Hopefully you read this section, you watched this video. You should be really prepared for today's quiz, and hopefully you'll do really well. I will see you all tomorrow on Wednesday. Hope you have a great Tuesday, and we will see you later. Bye.